Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi, my name is Andrew Grossman. I'm the District Administrator of Middlesex Conservation District. Isabel Bailey here is one of the supervisors of the board. We welcome you to a presentation with Amy Meltzer from Massachusetts Pollinator Network. So we are a not-for-profit quasi-state government organization. We put on educational workshops, biannual plant sales, and we have a lawn to meadow program. So some of the workshops coming up is a February winter sow on the 7th in Billerica Access Television. That will be from 3 to 4:30. That's on our website. All of these events are on our website. So Isabel is going to be leading that workshop. She'll have native plants, native seeds, not native plants, so grow into native plants. In jug, yeah, bring your own milk jug. You don't need a cap, and you will use your jug to grow some native plants from some native seeds. And you just put it outside and it just grows into plants and you can put into your own garden. We're also going to have a film screening with Minuteman FFA at Minuteman High School on February 27th at 6:00 p.m. That is the movie The Biggest Little Farm we're going to be showing. So feel free to register for that. We have some planned workshops in the works, the rain garden tour, high tunnel cover cropping, and some more. So we'll eventually get those on our website. And if you don't know, our website is middlesexconservationdistrict.org. You can just, Google it. It should come up. It has a little green symbol with like what looks like an E on that. I don't know what that was. Okay. And we also have biannual plant sales. So we have our spring plant sale coming up on May 1st and 2nd. And that's also going to be at Minuteman High School. It's going to be at their horticultural program, which is in the back left. We are going to be selling live plants. These are all native plants. We've got hazelnut. We're going to get blueberry. We've got black-eyed Susans. We've got fireweed. A ton of plants. Minuteman High School. So I will be sending out a newsletter when our pre-orders start. And so what happens with the plant sales is that we have a pre-ordering period that'll hopefully run from March to late April, and you will order your plants ahead of time, and a pickup and a cash sale will be on May 1st and May 2nd. So you will come at it'll be a specific time period on Friday and Saturday where you can pick up your orders. And then we'll have a fall plant sale in the fall around September. So feel free to order some plants and make your gardens even nicer, support our pollinators and our wildlife. And one more thing is we have a lawn to meadow program, which we started our second round. It's where we're transforming about 100 square feet of lawns into native meadow. We hope to continue this program with our grant proposal that we just sent in. We're hoping to get that through so that we continue to help more people decrease their lawn size and help our pollinators and decrease their water use, gas use, etc. All right, so we welcome you. Oh, you have a question. Hello.
Have you registered today, get our email address on your list, or do you do that as a separate step?
I think when you register, you can ask to sign on to emails. I'm not sure, but you can always go onto the website and on the top menu, it'll say subscribe, and you can subscribe to our mailing list. You do make sure that there's an email that sends back to you to confirm that you want to be on the email list, and then confirm that so you get our newsletters. And again, that's middlesexconservationdistrict.org. I know it's a long name. There's Amy Meltzer, and she will introduce herself and do the presentation. Andrea. You're welcome.
It's great to hear all the programs you're doing. It's really wonderful. So thanks everyone for being here and coming out on a cold day. We're not live on Zoom, but we're recording on Zoom, so people will have access to this later. So we have this little square up in the corner. It's covering some of my words. So I think most of the time it's fine. If there's anything where you want to know what's going on and you can't figure it out, just raise your hand and I'll tell you. So I'm with Mass Pollinator Network. I'm on the steering committee. There's some brochures up here that people can get later. I'll talk a little later about some of the services we have that might be helpful to people. So today I'll be talking about how to support a variety of species, many of which are at risk, by gardening with native plants. And I'm going to start by talking about the biodiversity crisis. It's as serious as the climate crisis, but it gets a lot less press. So I want to explain that because it really tells the story of why it's so important for us to be doing this kind of gardening with native plants. I'll be talking about how native plants and trees co-evolved with many other species, particularly insects, so that they depend on each other for survival. And I'll be giving an overview of how to start gardening to support biodiversity and some of the important principles to follow to be most effective. And then at the end, I have a lot of resource slides, and usually there's time. I mean, I want to leave time for questions too, but I might go through them really quickly. Since you've registered, Andrea has everyone's email address, and you'll get a PDF of all those slides. So those will give you a lot more educational information and ways to take action. So starting with the biodiversity crisis, in the last few years, some reports have come out from the scientists at the UN who work on climate and biodiversity. They actually issued a joint report, which was unusual, saying that climate change and biodiversity loss are equally threatening to our existence and many other forms of life. Around the world, there are about 1 million animal and plant species facing extinction, many within decades, and that we need to deal with these at the same time so they don't get worse. And this kind of is what spurred me to create this presentation. I've been involved with Elders Climate Action, and when the Massachusetts report came out on how to get to net zero by 2050, part of it focused on natural solutions and recommendation to plant many, many trees, because trees are great at absorbing carbon and many other benefits too. But they didn't say anything about native trees. And I've been involved with native plants for a long time. And I know if we don't plant native trees, we're making the biodiversity crisis worse. We're like missing a big opportunity. So I realized people are learning about these crises in kind of silos and need to share information. So that's one of the reasons why I want to share this, is so people understand we can be addressing climate change and addressing biodiversity loss at the same time. So another report came out recently about what's happening in the US, which is 34% of plant species, 40% of animal species, and 41% of our ecosystems are at risk of extinction. So I know this is not fun news to hear. And I have one more slide of bad news, and then I'm going to be talking about what we can do to actually have an impact and make a difference and make things better. So the statistic in this graphic is a little out of date. We've lost about 3 billion birds, or 30% of our bird population, since 1970. So in the last 55 years. And a major reason for this decline in the bird population is that many, many birds, well, about 96% of birds at some point in their life, either as an adult or they're young, depend on insects for food. And insects are declining at a rapid rate. We've lost, 41% of insect species are in decline and at risk around the world. In the US, since the year 2000, we've lost 22% of the butterfly population. So in Massachusetts, we have about 400 species of native bees, and I think we all grow up hearing a lot about honeybees, and honeybees are actually not native to our hemisphere. They are not at risk as a species, and they compete with native bees for resources. So getting a honeybee hive actually makes things worse. It doesn't make things better in this part of the world. So because the bees that are at risk are native bees, they're very different from honeybees. And so that's what we need to be supporting. And then I also want to say it's not too late for us to take action to protect and, bring some of these species back. Some of the things that give me heart are the eagle population, which had just been decimated, and now we're seeing eagles all over the state. So we really can take action and make a difference. E.O. Wilson was a renowned American naturalist who died several years ago. He said, "If all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos." And this strikes me because, again, I think most of us grow up being taught that insects are either dangerous or annoying or disgusting or insignificant. And in fact, they're essential for the functioning of all ecosystems. They pollinate many food crops, so we're depending on them for, fresh produce. They pollinate 90% of flowering plants, so most plants need them in order to reproduce. They're food for many species, which you can see in this picture. And in turn, there are many species that don't directly eat insects, but they eat the species that eat them. And they're essential for decomposition. They're insects that are called decomposers. So, anything that dies needs to get broken down and it becomes nutrients for future life. And they're insects that do that. There are also insects that are in soil that help store carbon in soil. So they're helpful in dealing with the effects of climate change. And a report came out several years ago estimating that around the world, there's about 400,000 people a year who are dying because of a lack of fresh produce, because of the decline in pollinators. So I don't think we're seeing that here at this point, but the loss of insects is having an impact on human health and mortality. So there are a number of causes of the decline in insects. The biggest one is habitat loss, and there's several factors that go into that. One is industrial agriculture, which we see much more out west than here, but just huge fields, one crop, sprayed with pesticides. There's just nothing there for insects to feed on. And insects are actively killed in those areas. Deforestation is another way that habitat gets taken away. Urbanization, anytime we're paving things over and taking away soil and places for plants to grow, we're losing habitat for insects. Although there really is a lot we can do in cities to provide support for insects and birds, the ways that we plant our gardens and parks and street trees. So there's some good change happening in that way. And then also another kind of habitat loss is the widespread use of non-native plants. And I'll be explaining the difference between how native plants and non-native plants interact with insect life. Most of our nurseries and many of our gardens and public spaces are filled with plants from other ecoregions or other continents. And then we also have landscape practices that we're all used to that are also destructive to insect and bird life. So I'll be going into some detail about both of those things. And then other causes of insect decline are the widespread use of pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers. I live in Cambridge, and I actually have a little cabin out in Western Mass. So I'm like urban and rural. My son just moved to the suburbs in Framingham, and I had not really seen just the amount of pesticide spraying that goes on everywhere, the lawns, and it's kind of horrifying. And then they have pesticide companies coming up and ringing their bell and trying to sell them on their product and really telling lies about what they do, saying it only kills this and it's not harmful. So that's a big industry problem. Invasive plants and insects also are destructive to habitat. I'll be talking some about light pollution, which has been a growing problem over the last 50 years. Nothing living evolved with all this artificial night life, and there's many ways that it's detrimental. And then, of course, climate change. Whenever we have forest fires, droughts, floods, there's just many ways that climate change is destructive too, which is pretty obvious. So in this section, I'm going to talk about how native plants evolved around insects and birds and fungi and how they interact and depend on each other. So most of the close-up pictures in this slideshow are from my garden. I love seeing insects on flowers. I'm going to give some definitions. Native plants are plants that evolved with other local species in a given ecoregion, and they provide mutual benefits to each other. People define the boundaries of what's native in different ways. The important thing is that there's a productive interaction between the insect and the plant, but some people want to plant things from Massachusetts or from New England or from the ecoregion or east of the Mississippi or north of the Appalachians. So there's many ways of defining it. If you're concerned about it, you can find, the source of the origin of the plant. But again, the important thing is that they have a mutually beneficial way of interacting and supporting each other. Non-native plants are plants from other regions, either other ecoregions, like California is in the US, but it's a very different ecoregion than ours. So California plants are not native here. Anything from another continent is not native here. And those plants that have been imported I'll show you some examples of this, but they provide reduced or no support for local species. Even plants that were brought here hundreds of years ago it's called naturalizing, things that were used, you see daisies in fields, you see lilacs growing everywhere, you see daylilies everywhere. None of those are native here. They thrive here, but they're not supporting local wildlife. And then invasive plants are non-native plants that grow very aggressively and crowd out native plants and take over territory. So I'm sure you've seen this. This is literally a growing problem. I'm hoping that our state government will start taking action on it because it's gotten pretty overwhelming for individuals and municipalities to try to address it. We really need funding and training. In this picture, you can see there are plants that climb trees and smother them. There's others that spread and they exude chemicals underground that poison surrounding plants. So they just keep taking over more and more territory from the plants that actually are beneficial. So insects and native plants have been co-evolving for 125 million years. So I should say insects and flowering plants. And the result is that plants depend on insects to pollinate them in order to reproduce. And insects depend on plants for food, both as adults and for what they provide to their offspring. Plants have developed protection against being devoured by insects with several mechanisms. And the main one is they produce toxic chemicals that make them either, dangerous or just unpalatable to insects. And an interesting thing about this is many of those chemicals are useful to humans. We get perfumes, we get medicines. There are a lot of substances that we use from plants, and this is why they were produced, to have an effect on insects. And then insects have evolved enzymes that enable them to bypass the toxicity, but they can only do that for specific plants or certain plant species. And the result of this is that insects and plants have developed specialized relationships so that 90% of insects need specific plants for food and either can't survive without them as adults or they need them to feed their offspring. And most plants can only be pollinated by limited species of insects. So they've evolved a number of different chemical and physical traits that enable them to interact and provide benefit to each other. And it's pretty fascinating reading about this. There's just so much variety in the way they've evolved to benefit each other. Insects can sense and respond to flower color. So they see colors we don't see too, like ultraviolet. There are a number of plants that have markings on them that in ultraviolet that pretty much are showing the insects where to land to get pollen and nectar. So they can respond to those patterns. They've evolved shapes that enable them to work together. So you can see how nicely that bumblebee fits into that tubular flower. Insects can pick up scent. There's some bumblebees that when they've pollinated a flower, the scent diminishes. So another bumblebee coming by knows there's not much there. And then as the nectar replenishes, the scent returns. So the flower is able to signal the insect that there's food here, that I'm worth visiting, you're not wasting your energy. They can respond. Some plants change temperature when they've been pollinated. Some have electromagnetic fields that the insects respond to. So it's just really amazing to learn about all this. Yep.
Possibly any plants. I grow a lot of that and attract a lot of bumblebees, but I don't think of it as a native.
I don't know if it is or not, but I'm fully in support of growing food. So, but it would be interesting to know. And I wonder which bumblebees you're getting, because there's some that are common bumblebees that can pollinate many plants, and they're actually increasing in number. And there are others that are at risk that need very specific plants for their survival. So in contrast to how these insects and plants have evolved to support each other, plants that are imported, as I was saying before, non-native plants, and most plants that we've hybridized, meaning humans have changed, altered them, and selected for certain characteristics. Most of them provide little to no benefit to insects. So here's a few examples of these specialized relationships. This is showing a compatibility between insect and flower shapes. So these are two kinds of bee balm or monarda. They have long, thin, tubular florets. And I was really surprised to learn that there are bees and moths that have different length tongues. So these can be pollinated by insects that have long tongues or by hummingbirds that have that long, thin beak. Some flowers have really thick, closed petals. That blue gentian on the left never opens on its own. So these flowers can only be pollinated by bumblebees. They're the only insect that's strong enough to get in there. And that is really fun to see, to watch them wiggling in there, and then you hear them buzzing around, shaking the pollen loose. It's very entertaining. And then they develop chemical relationships too. So I'm sure you've all heard that monarch butterflies are in serious decline, and they need milkweed to reproduce. So here's an example of that. On the left, that little white ball on the leaf is a monarch butterfly egg. And on the right, it's one of the milkweed species that's native here, and that's a monarch butterfly caterpillar on the leaf. So the butterfly can actually get nectar from a number of different flowers, but the larvae, the caterpillars, can only survive on milkweed leaves. That's the only thing they can eat. So butterflies will lay their eggs on, monarch butterflies will lay their eggs on milkweed. One of our invasive plants is chemically similar to milkweed. It's black swallowwort. And when they lay their eggs on that and the caterpillars eat it, they get poisoned. So that's another reason to take out that particular plant. So this is known as a host plant, the plant that will support the next generation of insects. And then I want to talk some about the difference between straight species and hybrids, because even places that are selling native plants often are selling cultivars or hybrids, and they often will tell you they're just as good. And few of them are, most of them aren't. So with the straight species of a native plant, it'll provide nectar for adult insects. It'll provide pollen, which feeds baby bees, and leaves feed baby butterflies and moths. If you leave them to develop and don't take the stems out, they'll develop seed, which birds can eat in the wintertime. And because they're being pollinated by insects flying from flower to flower, there's genetic variability. The pollen is getting mixed, the genes are getting mixed. And that's always been important. I think it's even more important now with climate change, because we have so many adverse events. We have pests, we have drought, we have heat waves. And if all the plants are genetically identical, they could all get wiped out. But if some of them are different, there might be a few that can withstand a bad circumstance and go on and reproduce. So seed-grown native plants are really ideal. I'm going to show you some hybrids on the next page, but first, I just want to show you how to tell the difference. If it's the straight species of a plant, it'll have a two-word Latin name. So this is Echinacea purpurea. And once it's been hybridized, so this is a little bit covered up, it'll have a name after it in quotes. So this yellow echinacea is Echinacea purpurea sunrise. So anytime there's a name in quotes, you need to wonder, is this, unless you can do the research and find out, you can wonder, Is this really going to be as good as the original species? So most hybridized plants, again, will provide a lot less support. So this red one on the bottom has been changed so much, it's not producing nectar, pollen, or seeds. So it's sort of like hanging a picture in your garden. You might like looking at it, but it's not interacting with any other species. Some of them that still look similar have reduced nutrition in nectar or pollen. Some of them have a shape that's changed that makes them not functional. So for instance, there's a really pretty red wetland flower called Lobelia cardinalis. And there's some hybrids that have enlarged the flowers. So for us, that's very appealing. It looks showy and nice, but the long-tongued insects can't reach the nectar anymore. So you can't tell by looking. But anyway, I'm just suspicious now of anything with that name in quotes, unless I can look up a place to find out that it's okay. So here's some things to keep in mind. This is a redbud tree, which is a native tree that provides really helpful pollen early in the spring when some bees are emerging from hibernation. Normally the leaf is yellow. There's some hybrids that have red leaves. Caterpillars won't eat it, so it no longer functions as a host plant. So you want to avoid changes in flower and leaf color, avoid changes in flower shape and size. Some have been changed just to become dwarf versions. Those are fine. So there's some that do, again, maintain ecological value, but and again, I don't want to discourage people from buying a plant because you love it and you think it's gorgeous. But if you're wanting maximum biodiversity support, it's safest to get the straight species. So Doug Tallamy is an entomologist who's done really groundbreaking work and research about all of this. He's got great books out and he's a great speaker. So this chart is from one of his books, and the column on the left are the names of plants that have been brought here from other continents. The column next to it of numbers shows how many species they support, where they originated from, and that's between 40 and over 400. In North America, there's support between 0 and 8 species. And the last column shows how long they've been here, and it's between 100 and over 300 years. So that some kinds of evolution happen quickly, like things changing color in response to environmental conditions, but being able to digest different substances does not happen fast. So this is an illustration of why non-native plants tend not to be beneficial. And then comparing trees, ginkgo trees are native to China. They're widely planted here. They're really attractive and they're very hardy. They've been here almost 240 years and they support one species in the US. Oak trees, I actually need to change the number here because I realize it's much higher. They're the most beneficial thing you can put in the ground. They support over 2,000 species of mammals, birds, and insects. It's well over 500 species of insects. And there are many different sizes of oak trees. So if you have a tiny yard, you wouldn't have room, but if you have a medium-sized yard, you might have room for an oak. So on average, native plants will support 13 times more insect species than non-natives. And on average, non-native plants support 0 to 5 insect species. So I want to talk a little more about providing plants to support reproduction in insects. So I'm just expanding a little on things I've referred to before, but moths and butterflies lay eggs on leaves. And when the eggs hatch, the caterpillars eat the leaves. So I talked about milkweed. This is another example. This is the spicebush swallowtail butterfly. That's what I think is a very adorable caterpillar. Those aren't actually eyes. They're there to scare birds away and make birds think they're much bigger than they really are. But they can only eat, the caterpillars can only eat spicebush leaves, and I think sassafras. So those are the host plants for that kind of butterfly. And I'll show you some research that there are thousands of caterpillars that are needed as food for one nest of baby birds. Also, in the Pacific Northwest, in the summertime, grizzly bears, one bear eats 10 to 20,000 moth larvae a day. So most of these caterpillars are not growing up to become pollinators. They're mostly food, but they're needed as part of the food web. So we need to support the plants that enable them to thrive. And most caterpillars can eat the leaves only of specific plant species. They're specialized. So those are the host plants for moths and butterflies. So there's a similar story for bees. And I want to compare native bees to honeybees again. Honeybees live in huge hives. Most native bees are solitary. They either dig tunnels in the ground or in wood. And they make little nests in the ground. They'll lay their eggs there. They collect pollen balls. And when the eggs hatch, the larvae eat the pollen. And most bees can only eat pollen from specific plants. So they need particular host plants so that they can reproduce and come back year after year. So we really need to be thinking about planting host plants if we want the insect populations to rebound. Desiree Narango was a student of Doug Tallamy's, and she did this really great research where she found that chickadees, little tiny gray and black birds, I'm sure you all know them, need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one nest. And this is even before the birds fledge, when they're hopping around on the ground learning to fly and the parents are still feeding them. It's while they're in the nest. So what she found was if there were 94 to 100% native plant biomass, meaning the volume of native plant leaves in the neighborhood, the birds did well. If it dropped below 70%, birds began to starve because there weren't enough native plants to feed the caterpillars to feed the birds. So if you think about it, milkweed is a host plant and it's really important for monarch butterflies. Trees have many, many, many more leaves. Many of them support many more species of plants. So they're a really important thing to have. Native trees and shrubs are important to have in a landscape. And people are using her research as a rule of thumb that we need 70% native plant biomass to be able to support an ecosystem where the species can all reproduce and thrive. So this means, especially with caterpillars, that you're going to get holes in leaves. And again, I think this is something we were taught, oh no, something's eating my plant, it's a pest, it's terrible. What kind of spray should I use? And I've learned to get really excited when I see the picture on the left, something like that the plant is doing its job. There are caterpillars eating it, and they're going to either become food for birds in my neighborhood or grow up to be pollinators. And as Doug Tallamy said, bless you, if it bothers you to see the leaves, you can step back and there's a perfectly healthy birch tree. It's fine. It's not being damaged. It's just part of how life has evolved. Some native plants support a lot more species than others, as I was saying about trees, but keystone plants are about 5% of native plant species, and they feed about 75% of insect species. So in the resource slides that I mentioned, there's I might even have a slide in here that show you a short list of some of the keystone plants, but there's a much longer list where you can see what they are. And then other plants that are, I think, important to prioritize too are ones that we know support the endangered insects in Massachusetts. So Rob Gajir has been doing research out of UMass, and I have a spreadsheet of his plants that he's shown are needed to support the insects that are in decline in our state. I guess I didn't include that slide, but it's in the resource slides of the one of keystone plants. So I want to talk a little bit about soil too, because that's essential for having a healthy ecosystem. We're all familiar with mushrooms, and they pop up when they're reproducing. And actually, what's alive all the time that we don't see are mycorrhizal fungi. So it's that network of fibers that's underground. There's thousands of species. They're all over the world, and they're kind of a healthcare nutrition delivery system. They connect to roots of plants. They transfer nutrients to plants, between plants. They transfer water. They're really important for storing carbon in soil. There's a book in the resource slides called Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. She's a researcher from the Pacific Northwest who discovered some of these relationships and at first Nobody believed her, but then people have found out what she found is really true. There are a lot of great stories in her book, but one of them is she described a hillside that was wet on the bottom and dry on the top, and the mycorrhizal fungi were transferring water up the hill to the plants that needed water. And there's another about, I don't remember which trees they were, but an evergreen and maybe a birch that kind of exchanged nutrients through this underground filament system at different times of year. So it's pretty fascinating and wonderful, and we need healthy soil for all kinds of reasons.
Aren't mushrooms essential for honeybees?
I never heard that.
There's quite a few books on mushrooms.
Oh, interesting.
They're absolutely essential.
Do you know how?
These books were given out at
Uh-huh.
Deborah's Natural Gourmet at
Okay.
the festival last fall.
I'd be
Very
interested.
awesome.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear about that. I mean, mushrooms, many of them are associated with particular trees. So I don't know if they're supporting plants that honeybees visit. That's possible because they really do keep plants healthy. So anyway, that's interesting. So in this section, I'm going to start talking about how to garden to support biodiversity. This is from my backyard in Cambridge, which used to be all vinca and hostas and Japanese grass. And then I learned about native plants. So now this is a whole variety of native shade plants. None of them are flowering now, but many of them do have really nice flowers. And even when they're not flowering, I just love the variety of texture and different shades of green. So there's plants for every growing situation. So in the beginning, I was talking about how habitat loss is the main cause of the decline in species. And we don't have enough wild spaces left outside of our developed lands to bring all this life back that we're losing. We have 40 million acres in lawns in the US, which is equal to the acreage of our national parks in the continental US. In Massachusetts, we have 20% of land in lawn. And basically, a conventional lawn is an ecosystem desert. It's kind of like an agricultural field. It's got one crop. Many people use chemicals on it. It's basically keeping soil from blowing away. It might be storing a minuscule amount of carbon, but it's pretty useless ecologically. And then if you look, this is just a sidewalk strip of all these different native plants. And I'll do another comparison here. So on the far left, that little mustache is turf grass. And all these other plants are native plants that have deep roots that are going to store carbon. They're going to help absorb stormwater. They have all these different shapes of flowers that will support many different kinds of insects. They'll bloom at many different times when insects need them. They have foliage that can be used as shelter, and they can also host, the next generation of insects. So Doug Tallamy is recommending, he's got this great website called Homegrown National Park, which keeps getting more and more fantastic information added to it. He's advocating if we all planted half our lawns with at least 70% native habitat, we would really reverse the decline in insect life that we're seeing. So one way to, this is a big example. This house, I forget, it's not far from here. It's in a Boston suburb. I don't remember which one it is, but that used to be all grass in front of this house. And now it's native trees and shrubs and grasses and flowering plants. So it's going to provide terrific habitat. That's a big example. I mean, if you have a window box with native plants in it, that can be helpful. And you can start with anything that feels manageable, either in terms of space or your time or your money. I mean, when I first started learning about this, I did have a garden full of flowers, but almost all of them were imported. And my first decision was just, anytime I have a space in my garden, I'm going to add native plants. So I just made a commitment to that. After a few years, I gave my non-native plants away, and now it's almost all native. But you just start where it's comfortable and doable for you. But if you do have a lawn and you can think about it, just think about, what do you actually use? Like, where are people hanging out? Where are kids playing? Where are you walking from one place to another? And if there are areas that you're never doing anything with except watering and mowing, that can become habitat. And there's many different things you can do. You can plant all these different kinds of plants. You can have pocket forests, you can have flower gardens, you can have a meadow. So there's just a lot of ways to create habitat. So there are ways to make lawns more beneficial than a conventional lawn. So in this picture, you can see on the left, there's flowering plants. On the right, it's too short for anything to flower. So if you mow every 2 to 3 weeks, let the grass get 3 to 4 inches tall. There's research showing you will not have more ticks in grass that height than when it's super short. You leave the grass clippings because they're fertilizer. Don't use any pesticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizers. And then you can either add or allow flowering plants into the grass. I have another slide, again, in the resources that will give you more information about how to do this. But what will happen is insects will start coming to get pollen and nectar from the flowers, and then birds will come looking for insects as food. So now you have this nice wildlife scene in front of your house or behind your house instead of just a green carpet. So, and it's exciting to see it and see the variety of life that you get. So I want to talk about how to maximize the biodiversity benefit of your yard. So if you're going to plant native flowers, it helps to plan. Most of these are perennials and they just bloom for a few weeks, or some of them will bloom for 6 weeks. You know, they bloom at different times during the growing season. And it's helpful to have plants in bloom from early spring through fall because we're feeding a variety of insects that have very different life cycles and they need food all through the whole period. As I mentioned, bees emerge in the spring and they're collecting pollen to feed their first brood. There are insects that are feeding themselves to migrate in the fall or to lay eggs. So there's just need for flowers through the whole period. If you plant in groups of 3 to 5, this is often recommended by garden designers because it looks nice for us to have a nice mass of flowers if you have room to do that. It's also helpful for insects. So again, making a comparison, honeybees can fly miles to find food. Most native bees fly maybe a few hundred yards. So if you have masses of the flower they like, they can save energy just foraging in one small area. Again, to maximize benefit, include the keystone plants, the ones that support the most species. Include the plants that we know support endangered insects around here. Aim for 70% native biomass. So you're not counting the number of plants, but kind of estimating the percentage of native plant material. And then I've been talking about flowers here, but again, native shrubs, trees, and grasses all also provide really important food and shelter. So life needs water, and you can provide water if you don't have a natural source near you. You can just have a shallow dish, put some pebbles in it so insects have a place to stand. And if you refresh the water every few days, you don't have to worry about mosquitoes breeding in it. And during droughts, you have to keep an eye on it because it'll dry out really fast. And then I had mentioned earlier about night light. So nothing on Earth evolved to have artificial light on all night long. It's bad for human health. Migrating birds get lost. There are a lot of moths that are out pollinating at night, and it's really confusing to them. I don't see this as much as when I was younger, but I don't know if some of you remember dozens of moths flying around light bulbs outside at night. I mean, there are a lot fewer moths now, we can see that, but they get disoriented and exhausted, and it kills them basically. So ways to minimize the impact of this are, if you have places where you're comfortable leaving the lights off, that's ideal. Like the less light, the better. If that's not comfortable, you can put them on motion sensors so they only go on when you need them. If you switch to yellow spectrum bulbs, so like this is pretty warm yellow as opposed to cold blue. You can go even yellower than that. That's less detrimental. Use the lowest wattage that you need for your sense of safety and being able to see where you're going. And then just shine the lights only where you need them. And also try to keep light from shining out of your house into your yard at night. So all those things are helpful. I have a link to Dark Sky International in one of the resource slides. They're doing a lot of research about this, and they even have links to places to get good light bulbs and light fixtures. So that's helpful to know. And then providing shelter. So 70% of native bees nest in the ground. So it's helpful to have some bare ground for them. Normally, I recommend planting so that plants grow together and cover the soil. It keeps weeds from coming up. It keeps the soil moist. It provides better habitat. But if you have space to leave some bare ground, that's helpful for the native bees that nest there. I also want to say it's the insects that are living in big hives that sting because they're protecting the hive. These solitary insects that you'll be attracting with native plants don't sting. So that's good to know. And then 30% of native bees nest in cavities, either in dead wood or in hollow stems or in brush piles. I'm going to talk a little about how you can leave stems for them. So here I am. So how to provide shelter through the year. The first thing, again, is a big change from how most of us are taught to care for our gardens, is just don't clean it up in the fall. Just leave everything. And if the plant stems are left standing, there are insects that will hibernate in them. There are insects that will lay eggs in them that will hatch in the following growing season. And then if you leave the stems up, you'll have a great variety of different kinds of seed that birds will eat at different times during the winter. If you leave the leaves on the ground, insects will overwinter in them. Some will find shelter underneath them and tunnel into the ground. And birds will also use them as a place to look for food. So I have found, again, this is a big change. It might upset your neighbors. They might think, you're neglecting your property, or maybe you're sick. They might start worrying about your health or your mental health. So it can be helpful to put up a sign, like a pollinator sign, and let people know what you're doing. If you have a meadow, you can mow around the edge to show I'm taking care of this. I tend to leave shorter plants growing in the front of my house near a busy sidewalk so it doesn't look too wild, and I let things get a little hairier and looking in the back, just to let people know this is still a garden. But one thing you'll find if you don't clean up is that there's a beauty that we've been missing out on. There's a variety of dried leaves and dried stems in different shades of brown. There are fluffy seed pods. So there's all these different shapes of dried flowers and seed heads that are interesting in themselves, but when it snows, it starts looking like you have a sculpture garden outside. So there's a whole kind of beauty we've been missing that we can get accustomed to that will also be beneficial for wildlife. Yeah.
So I have a pretty huge thriving meadow. We've been having a brush cut every November.
Yeah.
And I was wondering about that. Does it at all? And the only reason I kind of done it because I think, it will help in the spring. New things grow up. Does it make? Because I'm happy to leave it standing. I think the good advice for that is mow 1/3 of it a year, because if you don't want it to turn into woods, right,
you do have to keep the woody plants out.
Yeah.
So if you mow 1/3 of it, you're leaving 2/3 as habitat. And I've also heard recently, if you mow in curves, for some reason, that's helpful. I can't tell you why, but somebody's done some research about that. And then you just switch which third you're doing every year, and then you have all that habitat, and you're keeping it from turning into a woodland lot. That's a good question. So basically, anything that nature leaves lying around that we might look at as debris or mess is helpful. Rocks, dead and living trees, brush piles, leaf piles, grass clumps, tree limbs, they're all providing shelter and habitat, and often they're food. Like when a tree dies, there are a lot of insects that start eating it and helping it decompose, and then there are birds that eat the insects. So it's really all part of the cycle of life. I can't leave these things in my yard in Cambridge because it's tiny, but I do have a brush pile in the back and a leaf pile behind a bench. But if you have room to leave these natural materials, that's all helpful. I really, humans are smart, but we think we're smarter than we are. These millions of years of evolution in nature, a lot of things got figured out without our intervention. If we can leave things alone, it's helpful. So I talked about how to make it more palatable to neighbors who might be wondering what's going on, and then also really look for the beauty in this new way of taking care of things. Yeah.
I have a question. We bought a house for Reno, and was slowly changing gardens, and they had gardens that they were just overgrown and very woodsy inside shrubs and stuff. Last year we did a big one, and I needed a pollinator friendly garden. Not all the plants are native. I'd like to have more native. This year was the first year I left up and didn't cut away the plants because I read an article about asters and various different ones, and I had all those.
Right.
I left them up. But my question is in the spring, when I know that they're a habitat, I don't want to get to the point of new growth coming and then I've got to weed through it to cut the old.
Right.
I wasn't quite sure.
I'm just about to talk about that. You're right on time. I think it's the next slide, but if it's not, it's coming soon. Yeah, it's coming soon. So first I'm going to talk about how important leaves are. So people have known for a long time leaves and have been recommending leaving the leaves. They provide, you really don't ever have to bring in mulch or fertilizer. You don't have to pay for it. You know, nature designed it so it's replenishing itself. So leaves will keep the soil temperature even. They provide insulation in the winter. They keep the moisture even in the summer. Again, they're providing, you know, shelter and habitat for insects. But someone just did some research that was just published recently where they really studied and compared spaces where leaves had been removed and where they had been left. And they found in 1 square meter of ground where the leaves were left, 2,000 insects emerged in the spring. And they didn't where there weren't leaves. So they were showing that removing the leaves reduces moths by 45%, spiders by 56%. I know there are people who don't like spiders, but they provide their food themselves and they really prey on other insects that we don't want to have a gazillion of. Beetles are pollinators, and the variety of moths and butterflies was reduced by 44%. So taking the leaves away, really, anytime we're cleaning up our yards, whether it's stems or leaves, you're basically throwing out next year's generation. And I'm not saying that to make anybody feel bad, because we were all taught to do that, and that's what I've done until recently. Shredding leaves also is chopping up whatever is living in it. So I know people have been doing that to create mulch. There's a whole continuum of care in your yard, and you really get to decide. So I'm kind of emphasizing what provides the most benefit. If there are things about this that don't work for you, you know, you can make other choices, but it's like you have a menu and you can pick things to do that will be beneficial. So here we are, what to do in the spring when you didn't clean up in the fall. So there are places where you don't want to leave thick leaves lying. Probably if you have a lawn, you probably wouldn't have left them there all winter either, because a thick, wet, matted layer of leaves is going to rot what's underneath it. So in the spring, I move leaves away from the crowns of my plants. I leave 1 to 2 inches between the plants. And if I have excess of that, I'll make a leaf pile somewhere and I'll let it decompose. If it's too thick, the insects in it won't be able to escape. But sometimes you don't have a choice. You don't have enough room. You'll still get mulch and fertilizer out of it. So for the standing stems, once you have, there's no perfect time to do it because insects emerge. They have different life cycles. So there's no time where you're not going to harm anything. But people are recommending if you wait until daytime temperatures are about in the 50s and cut the stems between 8 and 18 inches. The plants will grow up around the stalks. It actually can act a little bit as a support for the new shoots that are coming up. And then the stems that you've left, bees will emerge from and other insects will. And again, I want to say, I've never seen swarms of bees coming out of anything. It's a subtle process. And if you can put the stems somewhere on your property, they may still be able to emerge later in the spring. And then to protect soil, so we have these mycorrhizal fungi. There are also millions of organisms living in the soil that are all providing benefit. So basically you want to minimize disturbing the soil. Obviously, if you're planting something or weeding something, you have to disturb the soil. but just do it as little as possible. You know, do what you need and no more. Again, avoid using pesticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizers, not only to protect the insects and the plants, but you're protecting all the organisms that live in the soil. There's also research showing that the more diversity of plant species that are growing, the healthier the plants are, and the healthier the soil is, and more carbon gets stored in the soil. And I think part of that is because the mycorrhizal fungi are associated with particular plants. So the more different kinds of plants you have, the more fungi you have in the soil, and it's providing all those great benefits. So I talked about leaving the leaves. They're going to break down and provide nutrients to the soil, which will feed the plants. And then remember to remove invasive plants because they'll disrupt soil and plant health. And you have to keep an eye out on them because even if you've cleared your property, there's some birds will poop out seeds, you know, some will resprout from the roots. It's an ongoing process. So I think I've talked enough about chemicals. I want to talk a little about adapting to climate change because that's having a big impact. This native ginger that I had growing in my front yard in a shady area, but right next to a really hot asphalt street and a brick sidewalk. And I started noticing over a few years, it was turning brown by July every summer. You know, I waited and then it looked like it was consistent. So I moved it into my backyard, which is not very far away, but it's not next to a hot street and it's doing fine. So I think we have to be, you know, we're having a lot more heat, we're having a lot more drought, we're having a lot more variation in temperature. So we need to be watching our plants and seeing, are they thriving? If they're not, you know, will they be happier somewhere else? And I did research drought tolerant plants to put in my front yard, native plants, and they're doing fine. So, you know, again, they're the right plant for the right place. You really can plant in many different conditions. So when you're shopping for plants, I'm gonna, let's see if I put all of that in the resource slides. Yeah, anyway, debating how much to go into this. But here's the ideal: to look for native plant species, not hybrids or cultivars. Get plants grown pesticide free. There's some pesticides that persist in plants for years and will injure the insects that are coming to feed on them. So if you're shopping at a native plant nursery or a native plant sale, you're pretty safe. If you're going to a nursery that's conventional but has native plants, it's worth it to ask them if their plants have been treated. You know, watch out for companies that are going to tell you great for pollinators, and a lot of them are just, you know, jumping on the economic bandwagon. So you need to ask the questions, make sure they really are native to the region. And if you're not finding what you want, if you're working with a landscaper or going to a nursery, you can tell them what you're looking for. We're having more and more native plant nurseries popping up in the state. It's just the word is spreading that people want this. So there are more nurseries providing what we're looking for. And then I have a spreadsheet that shows places to get native plants. There's a page of all native nurseries. Anyway, you can pretty much find whatever you need, including mail order on this spreadsheet. That'll be in the resource slides. So this is the end of my formal part. I just want to say that, you know, we're facing serious environmental problems, and this is a really joyful way to make a difference. You know, you have flowers, learn new plants, see all this life coming to your garden, and it's thrilling and it's helpful at the same time. So I recommend it. Yeah.
Do you know if replacing a traditional lawn with a meadow has any effect on the heat islands?
Well, the more, are you talking about like in an urban area? Because that's,
well, it's suburban, but
well, the more, it should make some difference. I mean, I think trees are going to have the biggest impact on decreasing temperatures, but I would think meadows are going to be more beneficial than a lawn. You have the roots that can absorb moisture. You have more plants that are exhaling oxygen than the grass can. So it should have some benefit. But again, trees and shrubs will do the most, you know, actually providing shade and just evaporating more water into the air.
Water goes down into the soil,
when you have deep roots,
Mhm.
it helps to hydrate the earth and that will,
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, just to talk about that, I think the literature and data show that having like a green space, even if it's like, you're looking at these like 10 difference in black
Mhm.
I actually have a question for you. With so much with native plants especially, they seem to be very popular amongst rabbits and birds.
Yeah.
What sort of methods do you use to mitigate chemical usage, but
Mhm.
still find plants thrive?
Right. It's difficult, but I do have a slide called, in the resource slides, called Problems in the Garden. And one of them is how to keep bunnies from eating your garden. So there's some plants that tend to be more deer and rabbit resistant. I probably should take some questions and then show you what's in the resource slides, because there's going to be some answers in there. Nothing is deer and rabbit proof. You know, if they're really hungry, they're going to go for it. One thing I learned about rabbits is they will eat plants more during a drought because they're thirsty. So you might want to leave water out for rabbits. Anyway, there's more advice in the article that's in the resource slide, so I suggest that. Yeah.
I use a small farm in Concord, and I use like an 8-foot high plastic durable 8-foot metal depot. So keep up with deer.
Great.
And I have
Uh-huh.
but it's what works.
Yeah. We need more hunters. We really do. We lost our predators. Yeah.
talking about humans,
Yeah,
that's controversial.
it is, except there used to be natural predators, you know, wolves and coyotes that kept the deer population down. They're destroying forests because nothing's keeping them from eating all the young trees. So I used to be much softer on animals, but now I just see the destruction and I feel like we need to do
I
something.
suggest that you ask for venison at the restaurant.
Oh, right. That's like me switching to maple syrup from honey because I don't want to be encouraging people to have beehives.
But in our state, the hunters are not allowed to sell venison.
Oh,
They can only donate it to food pantries and
Oh.
stuff. So we need to change the laws as well as the
yeah,
concept that venison is food source.
good thought. Shall I quickly go to, were you about to ask something?
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned how kind of the evolution doesn't even like happen on century scales,
Mhm.
but the climate change effects are happening on like tangible decade scales.
Right.
So I'm wondering about how like a region you might consider native, New England,
Mhm.
for example, and how that may be different from South Carolina
Right.
native, but how they're working together
Yeah,
in a quick way.
Yeah.
So, how do you manage the fact that maybe in 20 years, the animals and the bugs and everything that are currently
Mhm.
native to those southern regions are going to be coming north, and like how do we adopt
right.
the plants that they want and need because you have no other choice?
Yeah.
Kind of-
So I can add something. I'm going to put this research into the slides, but I'll say something about it. I do think we really need to be thinking about what trees we're planting now because they live a long time. So I feel like with herbaceous perennials, whatever, like I found there's things that won't grow in my front yard now anymore, but they'll grow in my backyard. So to try to stay as native as possible, especially with short-lived plants. With long-lived plants, I put a little gray birch in my backyard, partly because it's drought tolerant. And then I started learning more about what you're talking about and realized, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but just, the heat zones and the growing zones have changed. We're warmer than we used to be, obviously. And I never thought about the heat end of that number before. It was just, is it going to survive the winter? Now you have to wonder, is it going to survive the summer? So now I'm also looking at the heat index. And again, I'm not really worrying about it for herbaceous plants that might live 3 years or 5 years. But for trees, that gray birch, the heat zone is 6, and that's where I am already. So I don't know if it's going to survive for 20 or 30 years. So I think it makes sense to, in their ecoregion, there's an ecoregion out west that's a little bit cooler than where we are, especially at elevation, so they may have other choices. But for trees, I would plant things that can handle the heat 2 zones higher than where we are. And then someone has done a whole lot of research about this at I think it's a university in Connecticut, but I'll add it to the resource slides or to the email that comes out with that. Recommending that we plant native or near native. So don't start planting from California. We know it's not going to support anything. But, the glaciers pushed plants down to the Appalachians that used to grow here. So I don't know exactly how that works with, local interactions. But if we plant things that are close to where we are, that can handle more heat, then I think that's the best guess. We're doing this huge experiment.
So there's a class of kind of near native plants that.
Yeah, I'll send it. They have a huge spreadsheet and lots of great information in it. So I'll send that. So is this a good moment for me to run through the resource slides? So you'll get all of this. So the first 2 pages are just a summary of the main points I made, sort of principles to follow when you're planting natives. So I'm kind of a spreadsheet nerd, so I've made a bunch of spreadsheets. I have one really huge spreadsheet of native plants, mostly of the Northeast. Some of them, I also take plants from other regions. Like one of the plants in my front yard is from the Appalachians because it's pretty. My neighbors will like it, and it blooms here and doesn't mind the heat. So it's a pretty big list. The next one was designed for a class of beginning people who were starting gardens. And so it's a much shorter list of plants for sun, for moisture and shade, moisture and dry soil, shade plant, but it's just a much shorter list. And I want to show you what the spreadsheets look like. So this is a sample. So they have the common name and the Latin name. The green rectangles show you what months they bloom in, bloom color, the height of the plant, how far apart to plant them, whether they need full sun, part sun, or shade, moist, medium, or dry soil, whether they're resistant to deer and rabbits. It goes on, whether they have a clumping habit or whether they spread like crazy. So if you're looking for a plant for a certain growing condition, you can kind of look down the columns and find them. And then I don't have it in here because it was hard to make it into a PDF, but there's also a link on each plant that will take you to a page that shows you pictures of it and gives you more information about it. And now I have lists like of the keystone plants of New England. So you just, when you get it, you click on these and it'll show you all this information. Plants for different growing conditions. These are the plants that you can add to your lawn, allow in your lawn, or that you should keep out of your lawn because they'll take over or they're toxic. So these are the top keystone trees on the left. There are more, but these are the most beneficial ones. Here are the top herbaceous plants and shrubs on the right, but there's a link at the bottom that will give you a much longer list of the keystone plants. So those are the ones that support the most species. This is what to look for if you're plant shopping and what to ask for. Here's some habitat information. So if you have plants or insects and you don't know what you've got, is it useful? Can you ignore it? Should you get rid of it? You can use iNaturalist or Picture This and identify it. And then this is just more articles and information about creating habitat. Dark Skies International is at the bottom there about nightlight. Here's the problems in the garden page. So invasive plants, rabbits, jumping worms, homeowner association rules. And then because a lot of people ask me about bee stings, I put in an article about that. This is my page on the impact of honeybees on native bees and plants because it usually shocks people and a lot of people don't really want to hear about it, but I want to share this information. These are places where I've done my native plant research, like to make the spreadsheets and stuff, but Native Plant Trust has a great plant finder page. You can put in the characteristics you're looking for. Prairie Moon Nursery also has, all of these have great information about plants. And here are organizations and websites where you can keep learning, you can connect with people. So I'm with the Mass Pollinator Network. I actually have brochures up here if anybody wants to take that. We just want to help people educate and connect and kind of keep this movement going. So we have a monthly habitat chat where anybody can drop in on Zoom and ask questions. We have speaker series. We have a Google group where you can show up and ask questions. And we have a website that has a lot of information. We are now under the umbrella of Grow Native Massachusetts. They have a fantastic annual native plant sale. They have a newsletter, speaker series, so I recommend them too. And then Pollinator Pathways has, different towns have joined that. Native Plant Trust is a fantastic educational organization in Framingham, and they also have habitat you can walk around in, and they have a nursery. Seed Project is great. Here are national organizations, also very informative. These are newsletters that are informative and fun and entertaining. The top 3 are local and the bottom 3 are more general, but I love reading them all. You can learn a lot about what's happening locally and just research people are doing. These are my favorite books on the topics. And that's it. So. We still have time if anyone still has questions. Yeah.
What about weeds? Are there things like native weeds that are okay? And
yeah, a weed is not really an official word. It's like a plant that you don't want in some, you know. So I'm not sure what you're asking.
Identify something that's taking over from planting something.
Yeah.
Things that aren't desirable. So maybe you should identify them.
Yeah.
And say, okay, this is healthy, keep it.
Right.
It's not healthy.
Yeah. So in Western Mass, I have habitat and it's surrounded by woods, and like in Cambridge, nothing unexpected pops up because I'm surrounded by buildings and sidewalks. In Western Mass, all these plants show up, and it's a struggle to figure out what to do. I mean, there's goldenrod, which is really beneficial. It's a keystone plant, I should also say there's some goldenrods that are really well behaved, and there are others that spread like mad. So I realized with that one, I want to take it out because it's crowding other plants. So it's really a decision about, first of all, if it's invasive, get rid of it. If it's not harmful, is it as helpful or appealing to you as the other plants you have? So you really have a choice. If it's going to crowd out other things that you care about or that you know are of greater ecological value, then it's fine to compost it. If it's a nice garden plant that's spreading too much, maybe your neighbors would like it. So it's really, you have a choice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, this has been eye-opening. It's like find the resources
Mm-hmm.
and learn what's in my yard.
Yeah, right.
I know that garlic mustard is
Right.
other.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're hard to identify when they're just that big, which is when you want to pull them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be good to have baby pictures of all the invasive plants. That's actually a good idea. Yeah.
I'm planting more native plants and then these beds. And it seems a little overwhelming. Should I focus maybe on the keystone ones versus just all natives? Or, I mean, because they have the most benefit? Is that my understanding?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's overwhelming because of the size or just the choices you have.
The education of what I need to learn.
Oh, okay.
All the different various plants.
Yeah.
I probably have at least 50% native at the moment, but I'd like more, but I have a huge bunny issue. And that's why my non-natives are there regarding these natives.
Some of them actually do that, like catmint is not native, but it's minty smelling, and you can surround plants you want with that, and then the rabbits. Also, the denser your planting is, the less likely it is rabbits are going to work their way into it. But anyway.
My problem is these are only a couple years old.
Oh, yeah.
Beds, right? So they're smaller plants. as they're growing.
Mhm.
But am I correct in thinking that maybe focus on the keystone ones that are they the ones who provide the most
Yeah, that I think,
diversity and or
right. Yeah, I think that's, if you're choosing and you feel like anything would be fine, you know, the keystones are the place to start.
Okay.
And then also the Rob Gajir list of plants for endangered bees and butterflies. You know, those are good places to start. And then just make sure you like it and that it fits your site conditions. And then you'll be learning as you do it, you know, and you can expand.
My pollinator garden is doing very well, but
Great.
only maybe 50% native.
Yeah, you're doing great. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Oh, I know. There's, yeah. Yeah, and I'm not sure how to reach, I mean, you know, like I'm giving more and more talks and I see more and more people coming with some knowledge already over the last few years. And there's more websites and there's more nurseries and there's, you know, webinars and there's a lot of education going on. But there's a lot of people who seem not to be hearing it. There are signs called, you know, like there's a leave the leaves sign and it kind of explains why it's important. So it would be great to, I mean, the governor now has a biodiversity initiative, which I think she launched about a year ago. So, you know, like the conservation districts, just whatever we can do to spread the word. But we need a lot of education. Maybe people should be writing into their local newspaper and explaining, you know, to just take action wherever you can. Yeah.
I think there needs to be a distinction between garden beds and water.
Mhm.
There's so much misinformation like leaf and brought it up. About, you know, you don't rake the lawn, it kills your grass.
Well, that's if you have,
lawn,
yeah.
you know, you have to clean it up. But there's, you know, the information is
Mhm.
not very good.
Oh, in terms of just making distinctions.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is you don't need to make your lawn bare. If you have a thin scattering of leaves on it, it's not going to kill the grass and it'll still break down and fertilize the soil. So, you know, but if you're in a neighborhood where everyone wants it to look like a velvet, you know, carpet, then people are going to raise their eyebrows. So, but you're right. People need to have more specific information. Yep.
If anybody is interested, I know and
Mm-hmm.
some seed cuttings.
Right.
And I have a board with
Great.
yeah, so you know, the demos and the boxes, the service system and like the pollinators, no, it's STD code, in mostly the agricultural industry, and so
It's also spread by, the fields all over these, and
Mhm.
actually, it's still, the birds can't swallow, you know.
And that also is the one that persists for years in soil and plants. Plants are treated with it too. Yeah. Yeah. No, there are other seeds that are being used and it's treated in.
Oh, I was thinking the act, I think that was only in Massachusetts, I think it was only in regards to certain products,
Oh.
like wheat, is it for everything or was it just for certain ones?
yeah, so soybean,
Is it true that you can put some kind of animal urine around your garden?
Yeah, there's some products that
Here and
there's, I don't know how effective they are, but they're not harmful. Does anybody know about that?
I know my mom throws that sometimes let all over flowers,
Uh-huh.
like a
bloodbath, but it's ineffective.
Yeah.
Completely for chipmunks and squirrels.
I think the scent is a deterrent for some animals, but
You just have to reapply.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
yeah.
But if you also ask, like, how are they, if it is really like urine, or,
Mm, that's a great idea. That's a very good question. Unless, is it like a chemical equivalent that they're creating that smells like that? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just on the part of like this educational programming and research,
Mhm.
we're doing a lot here at the library. I'm so happy that we have and programs here. But we just did the winter seed, so we'll be doing one on Tuesday here at story time if you wanna, weather permitting. But in pollinators in June, we'll be also doing our transplant party where we take our winter seeds out and hopefully some of you might bring some of your judge back and do a good exchange and then keep them up to be giving out some of the seeds.
That is great.
So we have since we've been using during the season, looking at Laura here.
And we did it again this morning. We still have some left.
Yeah.
Could I share my wish list and see if you have?
Share it with our Middlesex conservation. What do you, yeah, tell us what you want.
I'm working on a pollinator garden to go around, Milwaukee Forest that we planted a year ago, October.
You want to what account or where?
Yes.
Okay.
Only because, it was designed by one of our volunteers, but some of the plants that she requested, I've been having a hard time finding.
The library upstairs is generally, we do a lot of vegetables and flowers there just because they don't require the winter seed cell. So we don't necessarily put all of those in the seed cell just because some of the plants in they're not going to die.
We had a big seed coat barrel farm on the 11th, and then so we have some
I have a sun-loving plot.
And then or I might have a couple from wild seed.
Yeah.
Cover crops, are there any that are better for the pollinators and the insects? Like absent how good they are for
Mhm.
the garden bed and protecting soil under any particular.
I don't know that, but I'd be happy to look it up. And if I find information, I'll include it with the resource slides. Do you know? Go ahead. Mhm. Yeah. Great.
We talked to help in the grass. They had some bare spots.
Mhm.
We had planted this grass. We've been, it's spotty with clover and where the top and it's thriving. It's much healthier than the grass looking. It's nice and green and.
This probably isn't good for cover crop, but violets are great to put in the lawn too. The other thing I want to say is sometimes plants that tend to get tall, if you mow them at like 4 inches, they bloom when they're this tall. So it's good to experiment too. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy.